And at that point, it's not about like who's right and who's wrong. It's more so about do you want to sell the house, or are you okay with the buyer possibly walking away and the buyer also possibly bluffing as well? How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Shawn and Matt Show. My name is Matt, that is Shawn, and welcome to our show. Shawn, in today's episode, we're going to be answering questions from the people, from the Redditors out there, Shawn, the heart of the internet. How many hours a week would you say you spend on Reddit?
Zero.
0
hours. So I don't have any hours.
Not even like 0.1? Not 1 minute?
Not nothing. I never go to Reddit. I should maybe, but I don't. I just don't have the time, man. Like, if I get 1 second, I'm typically like doing something that's totally joyful for me, just stupid video.
Well, that's just because you have 2 kids, a wife, and a dog, and a life.
And in spring market. Yeah.
And spring market.
Like, you can't.
I would say I'm like a 1 hour per week, kind of skim the headlines, see what I can pull, see what the pulse of our Nova and our Washington, D.C., and in this case, our real estate. So we're going to be going through a couple questions that I pulled and see how Shawn and myself would answer. First of all, Shawn, Wednesday, May 21st, we're heading into Memorial Day weekend, which is a little early, this year. And the question begs to be said, if you got a listing, are you listing it, the Thursday, the Friday, heading into Memorial Day weekend, or are you pulling back and waiting till next week?
Yeah, it's such a tough call because when you have it ready and it's vacant, or like, there's money on that other side where it's like, hey, if we have it ready, why not go? But I will always say that traffic, it will be slower. It's just going to be slower. Everybody's gone, everybody's on vacation. And anytime you see a big holiday like this, the real estate market is typically slower. Now, the people that are serious are out there. And so there are those people that are saying, we're staying here for this weekend. We're serious. We got to find something. So they have the advantage rather than anybody else. If you're sticking around for a holiday weekend, you really have an advantage. So I'm going live with one. It's a condo. It's a 2-bedroom, 2-bath in ARC 3409. It's ready. It's ready to go. I was having 2 come on this week, but then we got delayed because the client didn't like the staging. So you sometimes get that. It happens. And so we're like, all right, let's pull back. Let's do some other things in there. We're going to stage a little bit more and get it on next week. So, sometimes that's important.
Well, how long have you been preparing this property to go on the market? Was this like a recent thing where they called you, or was this like a 6-month plan?
Oh, no. They called me a while ago, but the tenant just moved out like 2 weeks ago. So it's always like, run, paint, get it done.
So it's like a tenant timing sort of situation.
Correct.
Because I think my mindset is if you had like 8 months and knowing that you wanted to sell in May, you'd probably avoid this weekend. But if the stars align where the property can be ready this weekend, you go for it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we're going for. It's like tenants moved out. We want to, try to stop the bleed with the money that we're paying out every month and get it sold. And so, and the thing is, we're always on time crunches. And when properties are or when they're gone, right? Get the painter in there, get the stager in there, get the pictures, get it on the market. Well, sometimes you do it all, and like the owner's like, I don't really like the staging. Okay, well, we got to wait a week then. Like, let's redo this, make sure it's right, make sure it's the right way that you want it, and then let's put it on the market. And sometimes saving that week is the right way to go, right? And so in that instance, I think they were right. We're going to redo some of the staging. We're going to make it right, and then put it back on the market. I think it'll perform well.
All right, let's get into the first question. Shawn, this is a multifaceted question. I want to be sure I'm describing this correctly. The buyer's agent made an offer on a house that's been on the market for 192 days, a very long time. What do you think the listing agent said? We have multiple offers, right?
Yeah.
Because that always happens, right? A house is randomly on the market for half a year, and they said they had multiple offers and that they're calling for the highest and best. This is kind of aggressive by the buyer's agent. So they assume that's an obvious bluff, which, maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Their offer expired that evening. The buyer's agent offer expired. And then get this, we resent another offer that was $50,000 lower than the first the very next day.
Wow.
Kind of aggressive. And then the next line is, my clients are now in the house. So the buyer's agent apparently did a really good job and got their client a deal. I'm not sure if it ended up selling for $50K lower or what. But then the listing agent sent a letter complaining that this is bullying and that the sellers felt like they were forced to leave money on the table. The buyer's agent is asking, am I the fill in the blank here? Am I the, you know what here?
100% no, man. You're the winner. You won.
You're the winner.
That's how you negotiate.
Yeah.
Like, listen, buyers, sellers have a choice. They don't have to take your offer. If you lowball them, they don't have to take the offer, right? If you come in high the first day and you try to take it off the market and they say no, and then you wait through the weekend and you come in lower, guess what? The seller lost the negotiation. You should have taken it, And so these are the things you have to weigh.
Do you think they had another offer?
It sounds like no.
It'd be a pretty asinine bluff to do that.
Yeah. I mean, listen, when properties sit on the market like that, sometimes they will get the offers all at the same time, right? And it's weird because you're like, wait a second, you've been on for 190 days and all of a sudden you have 3 offers. Dude, it happens, right? It happens. Now,
how do you know? How do you know they're not lying?
You don't. That's the problem. And, in my instance, like I tell the truth, right? Like if I don't have an offer, I don't have an offer, but I try to make it sound the best that I can.
Some agents are circling. We've had a lot of showings.
We've had a lot of showings. I am talking to 2 other agents, that kind of thing. But to bluff hard like that and say highest and best and blah, 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 not the way to do it. And you're going to gain a reputation for doing that kind of stuff, right?
What could possibly be the complaint? I lost at negotiating. Like, I'm upset at you.
You bullied me.
Is that the complaint? Gosh. That's ridiculous.
Dude, this is negotiation, man. And if you can't handle it, you can't handle it. And
but I more so brought it up because of the 192 days and then the multiple offers, because that seems like a not uncommon scenario to have happen.
It happens, and people are like, wait, are they lying to us? I mean, sometimes it happens that way, and you have to think of why did this happen? All right, it's been sitting on the market. Maybe interest rates dropped. Maybe some other factor in the markets happened that caused the people to say, hey, I've been waiting on this house for a long time. And believe me, it happens all the time. And I'm like dumbfounded. I'm like, all right, we got this one. I put in the offer. I'm like, we got to be the only offer. We got this, right? And then boom, I'm sorry, we just got another offer. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me? It happens all the time. So, if you like a property and it's been on a while and you're kind of going through, just get the offer in as quickly as possible, because if you can get that thing wrapped up, you're going to be a lot better off than competing again and paying a higher price. And it happens. I'm telling you, just get it in.
All right, let's move on to the next question.
Okay.
Listing says home has a cooling system, but inspector says it doesn't. Is a concession fair? So this has to do with the property listing description having whether it's false advertising, whether it's a blatant lie, or whether it's a typo. So essentially, the buyers put in an offer, and the MLS listing says that it has a cooling wall unit, a cooling system, mini splits, and they're fine with that, and the offer was accepted. They do the inspection. The inspector says that there's no cooling of any kind, none.
Wow.
And so, they reach out to the listing agent, and they said, oh, it's a typo, and the listing agent kind of just moved on with their life. And they're like, well, wait a second, we wrote the offer thinking that it had a cooling system. If it didn't have a cooling system, we would have adjusted our offer lower. And so these buyers ended up submitting a concession request for the mini splits to have a cooling system in the amount of $7,500 because it said it had a cooling system in the MLS details. They assumed it would cost around $15,000 to install. And they said, well, let's just meet in the middle to make up for the agent's typo. The seller said, no, we're not going to do that. We'll give you $2,000, which ended up covering all of the other requests that these buyers had asked for. But they essentially told them, tough luck on the quote unquote typo or false advertising. So, Shawn, what are your thoughts on, hey, we went under contract under this pretense. Now we've been informed that that's not actually the case, and we want a concession for your error. How do you rectify that sort of situation?
Yeah, this is a rough one. Number one, on the MLS, it says this information is deemed correct, but
deemed reliable, but not guaranteed.
Not guaranteed. So that's number one. It's not guaranteed information. However, when a listing is on the market and that listing agent puts that property on the market, and they should go through it and look at it and say, is everything correct? I think everything is correct. Let's put it on. I mean, we've definitely made mistakes in listings before. And when it comes down to it, it's like, wow, all right, something like that, a big thing like that, there's no cooling, right? This is a big mistake.
It is in the Pacific Northwest. These buyers are moving from out of town, out of state. So I think they fully assumed a house would have cooling. But maybe if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you're an astute home buyer, you may think, oh, it's probably not guaranteed. But regardless of what's normal in a certain market, if there's false information on the listing description and you're going under contract thinking that this is correct and it's not, what is the solution there?
Yeah, it's hard. The one thing is the buyer doesn't have to buy it, back out of the contract and then a week later rewrite it. I don't know. That's one solution to try to get your way. Number two is keep the negotiation going and try to get that money. But number three, and what we have done in the past when we screwed up something, was we actually said, hey, it's our fault. We'll give you the money, right? We've done this. And so like when a seller is like, hey, this is kind of like, I want this offer and we're not willing to give it. Hey, listing agent, since you kind of screwed up, will you give some concession for this? Yeah, in the end, it's my fault, right? I should have looked at that listing and I should have said, all right, no, it doesn't have the cooling. I kind of screwed that up. I feel bad about this. And this negotiation is important to both sides. So I will give the $2,000, right? I think that's the right thing to do in this instance. And, as a listing agent, sometimes you have to give in to these things. Not everybody's perfect and there will be mistakes. And when those negotiations come down to a dollar amount, and you're being paid for this, you should probably think about, hey, I'm the responsible party here.
Yeah, I had an issue with like a sound system, and it was like my client had like a server in their basement that just controls, every single light bulb and switch and Cat 5 and this and that. And I was like, yeah, it conveys. And then the seller was like, no, it doesn't. And the buyer was like, I really need this. And I was like, listen, it's midnight. I'm trying to get this ratified. I'll just cover the $5,000 and let's everyone move on with their life.
Yeah.
Because I wanted the house to sell.
Yeah.
And if the buyer is okay losing a house over $5,000, or if the seller is okay losing a house over $5,000, who cares the least? Because if you're okay walking away, which these buyers ended up doing, great. Walk away, buy a new house. And if you're a seller and you think you can get a better offer from another contract by going back on the market, great. Get out of the deal. Yeah. It sounds like both sides were happy to move on. I would be very curious to look at this listing description. You think they added in no cooling in the house after this? I think you have to. If you're losing a deal over this. But also, I mean, do you really need cooling in the Pacific Northwest? I think, Seattle is one of the largest cities in the United States of percentage of houses without air conditioning. So maybe the next buyer just doesn't care about AC. So.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, all right, how much does it cost to put them in yourself? You can have brand new units, wall units, like they were saying, just install them there, $1,000 a piece, cool, and move on with your life. Sometimes it comes down to these things, and I was talking the other day. I actually had a settlement face to face with a good friend of ours in our agent and his client and my clients all together at the settlement table, and I was like, man, this is rare anymore. We just don't go to the table like this anymore. And I was going over how, like, back in the day, we used to sit at the table and it was very uncomfortable because you'd be fighting over $500 or $100 in a walkthrough. You're settling an $800,000 deal and you're fighting over a couple $100. And this is kind of the craziness that goes on in these deals and the psychology that you've got to deal with on that side. And a lot of times I'm like, dude, I'll give you the $100. Here's $100. Let's just everybody be cool and let's chill, right? If it's me and I'm buying the house, I don't care. Right. It's $2,000. I'll put in the stuff, right? I'll try to get my money. And if I can't get it, I move on. But that's my personality. But if I'm fighting for a negotiation for somebody else, I will fight.
I think you got to push. I think you got to push a little bit.
You have to.
You got to push like the emotional side of the agent, the ethical side of the agent. Like, listen, they're first time home buyers. They have 2 kids. They're starting their family. They wanted to do it, put their kids into these schools. And now they have to spend all this money because of a mistake. Let's just figure out a way to make this happen. You got to pull those emotional strings.
You have to. And you screwed up the listing. And so I think it's your fault. I honestly do. I mean, and if it was me, I'd feel like hell if I did that, right? I'd feel really bad. And I'd be like, oh my gosh, this is my fault. And I'm that type of person that will say, listen, this is my fault. I'll take responsibility for it. I want this deal to happen. I'm giving you the $2,000. That's it, So, and I've done it in the past.
Let's move on to the next question. Under contract to buy, just found out the house is 25% smaller than listed. Long story short, went under contract on a house 5% under the asking price. The house sat on the market about a month, and then it felt overpriced by a good amount, but the price per square foot made sense. It may have even been a bit cheap. The appraisal comes back, house is 25% smaller than it was advertised. Now we're obviously looking to renegotiate the price with the sellers, and we're not worried about getting our EMD back if we can't reach a new price. We're not totally sure how to act on the leverage, assuming we have it. I don't know how much leverage they're going to have. The sellers have been a bit reluctant to concede much in negotiations up until this point, and we wouldn't be surprised if they'd be unwilling to budge in the light of these square foot revelations. So our question is, what options would we have at our disposal if they relisted with the same incorrect square footage? It seems like they just maybe fudged the numbers of the square footage on the MLS, and then when the appraisal happened, the appraiser noted a different square footage, a different price per square foot, and now these buyers are thinking, oh, well, this property is way overpriced. And the appraisal came back at value. The second appraisal came back at value. The first one, $5,000 over the contract sales price. So the only person that thinks it's overpriced is the buyer that's now realizing that the property is actually 25% smaller than they had advertised. What are your thoughts on this?
I mean, square footage is such a hard thing because, we can go based on builders' square footage. We can go based on taxable square footage. And then we can go based on scanned square footage. And it's very difficult to see which one is right. And, my question is, are you happy with the house? Do you love the house? If you didn't know the square footage, would you have cared? Like, you put in the offer based on what you thought the house was, and you love the house, right? 2 appraisers said it's of value or higher. So what is your problem? Okay, it's a smaller square footage. If the person flubbed it, okay, maybe you have a case, but listen, your appraisal came in at value. You can't there's nothing you can really do, right? How are you going to renegotiate because the square footage is smaller? I just that. It's a flimsy argument to me. And I'd be like, dude, I'm sorry, but that's what maybe the scan came in at. Maybe your appraiser was wrong. I don't know, but this is my opinion.
So where are they getting the number from? Because 25% smaller is not insignificant. That's a large difference.
Here's what happens, and I was doing this with a listing I have right now. The listing I have is 6,500 square feet. If you go to some of the competition, they put all of theirs, and all right, so the taxable square footage is 4,600, all right? 4,600 square feet. When you look at the competition, you'll see a below grade finished square footage, okay, below grade. What a price per square foot is looking at is above grade square footage. So when you're doing a price per square foot, you're looking at a taxable above grade square footage. How people flub this is they will add in the lower grade, below grade square footage into their actual square footage above grade, and it'll look like it's got way more square footage than the neighbor, and their price per square foot is a lot less. But when you actually look at the listing, wait, this is below grade square footage that they're adding to the actual above grade square footage. So you have to look at this stuff, right? And so when I look at my competition and I'm like, wait a second, their below grade says 0, but their above grade says 7,000. All right, they're flubbing, right? So you can't really go on that price per square foot. And not only that, when in appraiser's eyes, you've got to think of below grade square footage is going to be a different value than above grade square footage. So it's so hard on that regard. So that's number one. Number two is taxable square footage. Say it's a condo, okay? Condos, I've run into this where there's a sunroom, and in the taxable square footage, the sunroom is not included, okay? And so when we do the scan, they scan the entire property, and the scan includes the square footage of the sunroom. Well, do you include that now into your finished square footage? Well, some people would argue no, because it doesn't have air to that 10 by 10 area. But 10 by 10 in a condo is 100 square feet or more, depending on the size of it. If I would just take off the doors to that, would you then count it as finished square footage because now it's getting air flow to that. It doesn't have the vents. So it's a tough thing. And I've actually done this because I'm like, wait a second, my square footage is off. The taxable square footage is off. I'm going to put this in as this. But then I learned, you know what? It kind of screws up the comparable sales in that building if I do that, because it's now showing as a bigger square footage where everybody else's square footage was just going on the taxable square footage. And if I put it in as a different square footage because of the scanned area, then I'm screwing up the comparable price per square foot. And so I stopped doing it. I did it once and I was like, wait, maybe I'm wrong on this. Maybe I pull back and I just explain in the brochure and the listing that, hey, this is not including the sunroom, which has floors and windows and everything, and it's beautiful, but the sunroom square footage now is this.
Yeah, it's tough because some of those scans and some of the tax records are just wildly different.
Wildly.
So you got to start putting in like floor plan approximate or like tax record, not correct and things like that. So if you're the listing agent and a buyer's agent or a buyer comes back to you and says, listen, Shawn, your information was just not accurate. We thought it was much larger. We're asking for X, Y, and Z because of this, falsified information. What's your response?
This actually happened to me. They were like, wait a second. They were under contract. They were like, Shawn, the square footage you put in here was incorrect. And I said, I'm sorry, but I was going on my scanned square footage, and here's the floor plan.
You sent the scan and you said, listen, here's the information.
Here's the information. And the thing is, they weren't paying more than any of the other listings in there. It was the same price. They just thought, oh, it's a higher square footage. I'm getting a better deal. And no, you're not. It's the same square footage as all the other ones. But here's the information I used. I wasn't wrong in that, right? And I said, like, if you look at my brochure, it explains the differences, I'm trying to think of the end. Yeah. In the end, I was right. And they were like, okay, that's cool.
I'm trying to think of the only leverage a buyer could have. And what I've come up with is if they figured this out during a 7-day inspection period and they said, listen, we're going to back out of the contract in 6 days unless you agree to, I'm going to make up a number, a $5,000 difference because your floor plan is 500 feet larger than it should be. And at that point, it's not about like who's right and who's wrong. It's more so about, do you want to sell the house, or are you okay with the buyer possibly walking away and the buyer also possibly bluffing as well?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really it. You have to do it before that contingency is satisfied, or at that home inspection time frame.
Because there is no leverage.
There's no leverage. You don't have any at that point. So you're going back and trying to get money where the property is already appraised, and your square footage is different. There's no leverage there.
You basically have to hold them hostage under a different contingency.
Correct. Yeah.
All right, let's move on to our final question. This one is going to get a chuckle out of you. Post-closing, sellers want us to pay for a repair. What do you think about that, Shawn? Right. So essentially, the buyers and sellers agreed that any expense not to exceed $2,000 would be covered. So if there's an expense over $2,000, they would ask that to be repaired. If there was a minor expense under $2,000, that would be the buyer's responsibility. I believe that I'm explaining that correctly. There came an expense at the cost of $1,500. It was a gas leak that was an immediate safety concern. And the seller's attorney, the day after closing, reached out and said, my client's expectation was, since these repairs were contractually assumed by the buyer would be reimbursing the invoice at closing. Basically, the seller would not pay for any repair under $2,000, but they checked an item and they checked the system, and there was a safety concern for the system that they had to repair immediately. The seller repaired it, paid $1,500, and because there was an agreement that it was under $2,000, they expected that the buyer to pay that, and the attorney said, I failed to communicate this offer and expectation during the contingency period. My client will agree to maintain half of the invoice, but request reimbursement for the other 50%. Please speak with your client and advise on your position. The Redditor is asking, is this a ridiculous ask, and are we not liable to pay it? Just want to make sure I'm not missing anything.
This is tough, but it's clear and cut for me. But if you have a safety concern in your house, are you not going to fix it? Are you just going to let it go? You have a responsibility to give a house that is safe. And if you've got a gas leak, you're going to fix it. And if you push that onto the buyer, you're an idiot. I'm sorry. Like, that's just my point. Number two, if the lawyer failed, he said, I failed to do something. If you failed to do something, then it's your responsibility. And you failed to do it, you suck up the half, in my opinion, right? Mm-hmm. There's responsibility here. And if you're not going to be a responsible homeowner and fix a gas leak, then you're, like I already said, and the same thing with the lawyer. If you fail to do something, I get it that you agreed to do something and that's what that stated, that you wouldn't pay for anything under $2,000 or you would let it go or whatever it was. But now we're closed. And the closing went through and there was no documentation, nothing on that closing statement that said, hey, buyer is reimbursing this. That's where it should have been. And so after the fact, it's a very hard thing to do. Now, what I've learned in this business is that, a repair, if a seller says that they were going to do a repair and then we go to closing and you haven't done that repair, you're still liable for that repair. But this is a little bit different where the seller did the repair. The buyer agreed that anything under $2,000 wouldn't.
It was under a $2,000 threshold.
But it's a safety concern.
Yeah.
Right? And that makes it a little bit different for me. That argument for me is a little bit different, where if this was my house and it was like a safety concern, I'd be like, dude, I'm fixing it. Like, don't worry about the $2,000 thing, right? And that's the right thing to do. I'm sorry, right? And so it comes down to the right thing to do. And that's, in my opinion, what it comes down to.
It's the seller's house. It's their house up until settlement.
You're going to live with a gas leak?
If there's a problem, it is your responsibility to fix that. It just comes down to, after closing, how do you deal with sellers or buyers or vice versa asking for money for some sort of repair?
No.
It's after closing. Hey, closing has happened. Listen, if there's an agreement where, hey, you're going to fix this and you didn't get it done in time, sure, get it done in time. But you've made this, $2,000 limit on inspection requests. If that's under the limit, you got to take care of that. And I'm sorry, you got to just ignore any sort of post-settlement. We can play the, oh, I failed to communicate expectations and this and that, and, can you please advise and this and that. Listen, at the end of the day, we're talking about $750, $800, and if someone's agent or someone's attorney failed to do something, you got to fall on that sword and you got to take care of that.
100%. That's an easy solution. It's a quick solution. Why draw it out? Why get, the time and energy it takes to hash this out isn't worth it. Just get it done. Move on.
Let's move. People are just fighting over that last $500, losing sleep over it.
Yeah. I got to win. I got to win. I got to win. I got to win something, No, you don't. Yeah, let's just move on, man. Like live freely, happily, and love life, right? I mean, life is too short. Get through these things. And if I get in these situations, I'm like, listen, I'll try to resolve it. If I can't resolve it, I'll resolve it in a different way.
Let us know your thoughts down in the comments section below. If you would have answered the same way that Shawn and I did, or if you have a different opinion, we'd love to hear that as well. That's just going to about do it for another episode of the Shawn and Matt Show. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you then.
Take care.